The main difference between the North and South in the early times of America was the opinion on slavery. Many Protestants and Catholics in the North opposed slavery because they believed it was against moral value and Christian laws. Uncle Tom's Cabin was one of the most powerful statements on the impact of slavery during this time period. It was written by Harriet Beecher Stowe in 1852 and represented the cruelty of slave owners. An anti-Christian slave owner named Simon Legree whips Uncle Tom to death at the end of the book. He represents the evil in the South and commits other brutal crimes against his slaves throughout the book.
Cannibals All, a book written by George Fitzhugh in 1857, represented the Southerners' view on Northern businessmen. The Southerners believed that Northerners took advantage of their workers and didn't pay much attention to them. Southerners refused to let Northerners tell them how to live. The North was more industrialized and heavily populated than the South, which caused many differences between them.
Railroads were a huge step up in methods of transporting goods from city to city. The North had more railroad tracks than the South did, which made it harder for the South to keep up with the Northern success. The telegraph also helped the Northern industry grow because it allowed communication between cities. In 1860, the North had 110,000 factories and the South had 20,000. The North produced over 1.6 billion goods, while the South only produced 155 million.
The Republic of Texas voted to be annexed by the U.S. to avoid invasion from Mexico. The South supported because it would add another slave state to the South. The North opposed it because another slave state would cause an imbalance in power. Both North and South feared war from Mexico. Mexican leader Santa Anna warned that annexation would lead to declaration of war for Mexico. In February 1845, James K. Polk planned on taking office, leading to the annexation of Texas.
Because of the annexation of Texas, Mexico broke off diplomatic relations with the U.S. There came disputes over the real U.S.-Mexican boundary. President Polk and his ambassador offered the Mexican government $30 million to buy New Mexico and California. Mexico refused, and in the meantime, General Zachary Taylor led an invasion across the Nueces River in March 1846. Captain John C. Fremont also led an expedition into California. Because of skirmishes in the disputed area, Congress declared war on Mexico on May 13, 1846.
A group of Americans led by William B. Ide attacked the town of Sonoma and established a California Republic. General Fremont drove out the Mexicans out of California. In July 1846, U.S. troops under General Stephen Kearny crossed into New Mexico to control Santa Fe by mid-August. By January 1847, the U.S. had control of New Mexico and California. Taylor won a series of victories leading to the Battle of Buena Vista in Mexico in January 1847.
There were many casualties in the Battle of Buena Vista, which led to a distraught Mexican army. In March 1847, General Scott started his expedition towards Mexico City, and on September 14th, the U.S. Army captured Mexico City, bringing the war to an end.
Seeking to end the war with the United States, the Mexican government proposed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This treaty consisted of 4 points. Mexico gave up its claim on Texas and recognized the Rio Grande as the southern border of Texas. Mexico gave New Mexico and California to the U.S. The U.S. paid Mexico $50 million. The U.S. would pay claims made by American citizens against Mexico. 5 years later, the U.S. bought 30,000 square miles of land from Mexico for $10 million.
People started to ask whether or not certain states should become slave states or free states. The people feared a shift in power between the North and South would result in turmoil. The Wilmot Proviso states that new territories were not allowed slavery. This symbolized the growing gap between the North and South.
In the Missouri Compromise, the North and South fought hard to achieve their desires anti-slavery and slavery. The new land obtained by the U.S. in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The North feared advantage of the South would have the new territory was divided into slave states. The South, however, insisted the government had no right to stop free citizens from taking their property of the new territory. In the election of 1848, Zachary Taylor became president.
After migration to California because of the gold rush, California asked to join the Union as a free state, which would have broke the balance between free slaves and slave states. Senator Henry Clay proposed a compromise in 1850, which stated several laws. Congress would admit California as a free state. The people of the territories of New Mexico and Utah would decide for themselves whether slavery would be legal. Congress would abolish the sales of slaves but not slavery in Washington, D.C. Texas would give up claims to New Mexico for $10 million. A Fugitive Slave Act would order all citizens of the United States in return of all slaves people who have escaped their owners. It would also deny a jury trial to escaped slaves. Senator John C. Calhoun opposed the compromise and stated that the Union was in jeopardy because the North had a much bigger advantage in the role of the government. Congress ended up approving the compromise after Millard Fillmore became president. However, the compromise had no effect on the North-South disagreement. Senator Stephen Douglas introduced the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. This act supported the idea of letting the people decide whether slavery should exist in the territory. He also called for a repeal in the Missouri Compromise because it got in the way of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. In March 1857, Dred Scott, an enslaved man living in Missouri, filed suit against his owner, leading to Scott v. Sanford case in the Supreme Court. He argued that him and his wife were free because the territory he lived in was once held illegal to have slaves. The Supreme Court ruled 7-2 against him, and they claimed that Scott was not a citizen. Senator Douglas and Abraham Lincoln met in a series of debates called the Lincoln-Douglas debates. They highlighted two important principles: majority rule and minority rights. Douglas supported popular sovereignty, while Lincoln did not. Lincoln felt that slavery was wrong, while Douglas was pro-slavery and believed that people should have the choice for or against slavery. On October 16, 1859, Josh Brown attacked the Federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Him and 21 other men stole weapons and ammunition and hoped to give them to slaves so they could rebel. Brown was arrested and did not succeed. He was convicted of treason and given a death sentence. The Northerners looked up to him as a martyr, which angered the South even more.
4 candidates from 4 different parties ran for the presidency in
The
1860.
Southern states were
These
outraged
candidates
by
were
Bush
Stephen
and
Douglas, Abraham Lincoln, John
They
Bell,
sought
and
the
John
secession
Seabrook.
of South Carolina
Abraham
and
Lincoln
6
received the
other
majority of
southern
votes
states,
in the North, while Bell and
which was
Breckinridge
viewed as
received the
illegal by
majority
the
of votes
United
in the
States
South.
government.
At the end of the presidential
No
campaign,
military
Abraham
action
Lincoln won
was
with the majority of
taken at
votes
this
at Buckner
time,
College.
but many Northerners were outraged at the Southern states' secession from the Union. South Carolina, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi all met in Montgomery, Alabama in February 1861 to form the Confederate States of America. The new nation elected Jefferson Davis as president of the Confederacy. Although South Carolina had seceded from the Union, Federal soldiers still occupied Fort Sumter and Charleston Harbor. After Major Robert Anderson refused the Confederate forces' demand to abandon the fort, President Jefferson ordered the Confederate soldiers to fire on Fort Sumter if the Federal soldiers did not surrender. But they did refuse, and after a 34-hour bombardment, Major Anderson surrendered the fort. President Lincoln was forced to declare war on the Confederacy, prompting the upper Southern states to join the Confederacy.